Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Only Endometriosis podcast you need. Today we're going to be delving into what endometriosis really is and why it is so often misunderstood. So many women are living with symptoms and we're just told either it's part and parcel of being a woman, it's all part and parcel of a menstrual cycle, we're left to fend for ourselves, we're dismissed, or we're misdiagnosed. So today I'm going to look at why that probably is the case, or possibly is the case. We're going to look at the definition, the medical jargon that we're given around endometriosis. I'm going to offer a slightly alternative view. We're going to look at why we're misunderstood and steps that you can take right now, even if you're still waiting for a diagnosis, to start to feel a little bit better if you want to. So whether you're newly diagnosed, you're undiagnosed, but you have a feeling you may have endometriosis, or you're feeling completely unseen, no matter where you are on that pathway, this episode is here to help you feel a little bit more informed, definitely a lot more validated, and hopefully add a little bit of support into your life. So, where do we start? So, what exactly is endometriosis? So, Western medicine will tell us that endometriosis is a gynecological condition. It's where tissue similar to the lining of the womb essentially grows in places where it shouldn't. So it can grow, essentially it's womb lining, well, it's not actual womb lining, but tissue that mimics the womb lining that grows outside of the womb. So places like your ovaries, fallopian tubes, it can attach itself to other organs, so your bowel, your bladder, it can move through your abdomen, it can move through your diaphragm. I know some women who have had it attached to their lungs, even some who suspect that it's attached to the inside of their eyelid, and even some I've worked with who suspect it's attached to their toenails. I should stress that is really, really unusual, really, really uncommon, and there's no actual medical diagnosis proof that that was endometriosis, but they did seem to have patches of skin that or sort of almost like adhesions, I suppose, that acted weird when they were having their symptom flare up as well. But that's the weirdness of endometriosis. There's so much that medical Western medicine can't tell us about endo and what it does and what it doesn't do. The tissue we know doesn't shed like in a normal period, so it doesn't cause massive amount of bleeding. We don't have internal bleeding with endometriosis. We can see bleeding from the bowel sometimes. We can occasionally see bleeding from the bladder. I should stress that when I talk about things like this, and when I talk about the experience of my clients are not a snapshot of the general population. So please be in mind that when I'm talking about these experiences, I don't want to scare you. I don't want to add to the frantic panic that Dr. Google can sometimes add. My clients are women who are struggling with their symptoms. They've had enough. Their symptoms are massively impacting on their lives, and that's why they come to me. So it's by all means not a snapshot of women with endometriosis. Some women have endometriosis and have absolutely no symptoms at all, and some women have grade 1 endometriosis and have debilitating symptoms. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why we're so misunderstood, because there is no kind of parity, there's no comparison between different women's endometriosis. It's not like a broken leg where you can give rough timescales on what degree a severity of break will take to heal. A woman can have, like I say, grade 1 endometriosis and be debilitated in the symptoms. Another woman can have grade 4 endometriosis and have virtually no symptoms or even no symptoms at all. So that's one of the reasons why we're completely misunderstood. It's because nobody really understands endometriosis. And when you start to compare, there's nothing wrong with comparing in terms of normal. I don't like that word, as you know, but like something like I say, like a fracture. Then you can start to build timeframes in terms of recovery. You can start to build timeframes in terms of if you put a plaster cast on it for this amount of time, then generally X, Y, Z will happen. After that, you will start to feel a lot better. And then after this time frame, it will heal. Endometriosis doesn't follow that pathway because it's so wildly different from woman to woman. So that's one of the reasons. I'm jumping ahead of myself as normal, but that's one of the reasons I think that we're misunderstood, because it doesn't follow a set pattern. I actually did a podcast way back when I started this podcast many, many, many moons ago. And I've started this sentence. I'm not even certain. I might have deleted it. I can't remember. But I certainly recorded a podcast called Does Endometriosis Even Exist? I think it's still a blog on my website somewhere. And And I kind of argued that there wasn't such a thing as endometriosis, that endometriosis was actually lots of different conditions all bundled together into one label. But actually, if we broke it down and stripped it right back, there was probably about 5 different conditions that endometriosis could be classed as. And if we treated all the individual, if Western medicine, let me put the caveat, if Western medicine treated these individual conditions in inverted commas separately, then we'd see a lot more success. And I haven't necessarily strayed from that view. And if you're wondering why I think I might have deleted it, it's because I got a lot of criticism over that. So it disappeared. I was very fragile in those days, as we know, and this is a whole other podcast in itself, but as we know, when we're struggling with endometriosis, when you have struggled for a long time with symptoms being dismissed, it can be very hard to hear criticism and to take criticism and to stand up for what you believe in. And I am no different to that. I'm a little bit different now. I'm a little bit more robust than I was when I started going public with my views on endo. But yeah, completely diverging from what this podcast is actually about. So yes, the tissue doesn't shed like a period. But on the converse side, it can cause things like scarring. It attaches itself, like I say, to different organs, to different soft tissue and muscles within the abdominal cavity and potentially beyond as well, which is where we get our pain from. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future episode. And it can cause lasting damage. We can see scar tissue, we can see crippling pain, we can see lasting damage internally to our exactly the same as if you scar your finger, if you cut your finger deeply, you see that lasting damage to nerve ends and things, and the actual tissue. Again, that doesn't mean to say that if you have endometriosis, all of these things will happen. That's just what we can see. Just to say that it isn't, just to sort of give the example, or to make clear that it isn't tissue that's behaving like normal womb lining behaves. So quite often in Western medicine, we can see it described as a gynecological condition, but I think it's way more complex than that. It's not just an estrogen-dependent condition, which I've seen it referred to so many times. It's way more nuanced. We have a blend. There can be a hormonal element. Not every woman I've worked with has a hormonal element to her endo. So there can be a hormonal element. There's also massive inflammation element to endo. So I would argue that if you categorised it as an inflammatory disease, I don't think you'd go far wrong either. And there can be immune deficiency or immune system implications as well. So I'd say that certainly every woman I've worked with who has symptoms has at least one of those elements. I would say normally 2 or all 3 of those elements linked to their endometriosis. So hormonal, inflammatory and immune system issues linked to their endometriosis. So it's way more complex than just being a menstrual health or gynecological issue. In fact, I would argue it isn't actually a gynecological issue at all. Obviously it is, in the way that it impacts our wombs or our ovaries, or our gynecological gubbins, let's say. That should so be a label. It does impact, obviously, on our gynecological gubbins, but the actual act of endometriosis, the actual thing of endometriosis, goes way beyond that. And I think that's the main reason why it is so misunderstood. Like I say, it's historically researched as a women's issue. It's historically funded as a women's issue, which is all very well and good. It clearly will impact predominantly women, although there have been some men to have been found to have endometrial tissue or endometriosis type tissue in their abdomens, but predominantly, obviously, it's 99.99% women who struggle with endo. So it's not wrong that it's a women's health issue. Traditionally, women's health issues are underfunded, both in terms of treatment pathways, but research and medication as well. And that's a wider issue, but when we talk about endometriosis as just a women's health issue, then unfortunately it gets lumped into the underfunding. That's an issue to do with the gender health gap. That's not necessarily about endometriosis, but I do think if it was viewed as a chronic inflammatory disease, then the funding might be a little bit more forthcoming, although maybe not. Who am I? So it still takes 7 to 8 years to get diagnosed. That timescale for a diagnosis hasn't actually changed in the 20 plus years since I went through my diagnosis pathway. I was lucky. I think it took me about 4 years, which is ridiculous that sentence just on its own, I was lucky it only took me 4 years to get diagnosed. Nobody should have to put up with symptoms for 4 years before they get a diagnosis. But the diagnosis average time is even longer than that. And that hasn't really gone down in the 20 years since I was diagnosed. And because of that, well, not necessarily, it's kind of chicken and egg. We are so used to getting dismissed. We are so used to getting gaslit. We are so used to our symptoms being completely normalised. When I talk about my clients and I say that these are women for whom their symptoms are debilitating, their symptoms are getting in the way of their life, most of them experience excruciating pain on a regular or semi-regular basis with their endometriosis. Yet it's bizarre because pain isn't actually the main reason that people come to me. We are told, or we are historically led to believe, that pain is such a normal part of a menstrual cycle that even women who are experiencing excruciating pain still normalise it. And that isn't our fault. That isn't something that we can sort of point the finger at ourselves for doing. That's a societal issue. That's an educational issue. And I will say it until I'm blue in the face. A healthy menstrual cycle shouldn't actually involve pain at all. You might get some sensations, you might get some aches, you might get a few tweaks here and there, but actual pain, certainly debilitating pain, shouldn't enter into a healthy menstrual cycle at all. And like I say, even the women who come to me, now women don't sign up to my programs lightly. It's not something that somebody will see my website and sign up immediately. There are massive mindset shifts that take place before women are even in a position that they can start to believe, or most women I should say, are in a position that they can start to believe that they can manage their endometriosis naturally. And that's because of the normalisation and the gaslighting and the dismissal that we all go through, right from the early stages of our periods. So that's another reason why it's misunderstood, because many women just see endometriosis. I'm saying many women, when many people see endometriosis as just a bad period. People don't understand that it isn't just a menstrual health issue. And that's why I go back to this thing about the label that endometriosis is given. If we classified it as an inflammatory disease, if we classified it as an immune disease, if we I suppose hormone kind of still puts us in that kind of just another period category. But if we start to really talk about the inflammatory issues and the immune suppressant issues that we get with endometriosis, that rhetoric starts to become a lot more serious and a lot more, it pains me to say it, but a lot more validated. People stand up and take notice a little bit more, even though they absolutely shouldn't, but people stand up and take issue a lot more with a chronic autoimmune deficiency illness or a chronic inflammatory illness rather than periods, which is shocking. And we are all working to address it, but we're not quite there yet. Anyway, that's a whole different podcast, a whole different campaign. So, like I say, the fact that symptoms don't always match the severity of endo as well kind of causes a little bit of confusion. So it's absolutely fine for you to have stage 1 endometriosis and to have debilitating symptoms. The stage or the grade, whatever you want to call it, whatever your specialist refers to it as, that grade of endometriosis doesn't signify the actual impact that your endo will have on your life. And it doesn't follow a set pattern. And I think that leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding about endometriosis. I know, so I was diagnosed with grade 2 endometriosis, and I had no idea that grade 2 could actually be more debilitating than grade 4. I was kind of left really confused as to why I was getting all of these symptoms when I only had grade 4 endometriosis. Grade 1 endometriosis. I've had some women contact me in the past saying, well, hang on, I've got grade 4 endometriosis. Can you really help me? Or I've got grade 1 endometriosis, so why am I fainting every time I have a bleed? The system, and I know the system of grading endometriosis or categorising endometriosis has changed in some regionalities. It is changing in others, and hopefully it will see full-scale change. But I think certainly the historic way of grading endometriosis leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of feeling invalidated and confused yourself as to why you're feeling like you are. I think as well Western medicine culture focuses so much on suppressing endometriosis. or removing endometriosis. So essentially we're just given two options. We either suppress what we're going through, or we remove the adhesions. Now we know that removing adhesions doesn't cure endometriosis, it doesn't clear endometriosis. All it does is remove the adhesions. It might well grow back if you're not addressing the root causes of the endo, of why you're getting the endo in the first place. Then it may well grow back, and in a lot of cases it does. Suppressing endometriosis. Now, when I'm talking about suppressing in Western medicine terms, I'm not talking about managing symptoms. We are kind of sometimes given tools to manage symptoms. So quite often I have clients who've been sent to pain management clinics. I quite often have clients who've been sent, bizarrely, to STI clinics. Bonkers. But we are kind of given some tools, in the looser sense of the word, to manage our symptoms. But actually Western medicine tells us to suppress our endometriosis. So it says, take these contraceptive pills, take this new fabulous endometriosis daily pill, take this implant, this injection. These will all suppress your endometriosis. But again, it's not actually curing your endometriosis, it's not getting rid of your endo. Best case scenario, they will keep you on medication for years, you will be symptom free for years. But I've never worked with anybody who that has actually happened, who has actually had medication. Like I say, this is about women I've worked with. I have heard stories. Last week I spoke to a lovely woman who'd had 2 Mirena coils, I think, spanning over 10 years, and it had kept her endometriosis, quote, manageable. So there are cases of women where the coil, the implant, the medication does work. And for me, the implant worked for a set amount. I've got a whole host of other symptoms, but the symptoms that I went originally for my endo symptoms did curtail whilst the implant was in, and for a few months afterwards. But they came back, and when they came back, they were worse. That's because we're suppressing it. We're not addressing it. We're not nurturing it. We're not treating it. We're actually just suppressing it. And that was my experience. Like I say, I was put on the implant eventually when none of the contraceptive pills worked. I was put on I didn't have the coil, and looking back, I don't know why it was never an option. I don't know at that point whether it was actually part of the treatment pathway. I don't know whether it was, I should have Googled it before I came onto the podcast. I don't even know whether it existed back then, in the early 2000s. But I wasn't offered the coil as an option. And so I went straight into the Zoladex, that's a brand name, other brand names are available, the Zoladex implant, like I say, and that kind of suppressed my symptoms for the 6 months I was on that. I got other symptoms, certainly got menopausal symptoms, I got other types of aches and pains and different things going on, and then the effects wore off, I would say, again, probably 3 to 6 months afterwards, and like I say, when they came back, they were even worse than they were before I went on it. I was never once told what I could do to manage my symptoms naturally. I was never once told that there were steps that I could take to try and reduce the symptoms I was experiencing naturally. That hasn't necessarily changed. There are some doctors who are fabulous now. There are some doctors who will talk a little bit about diet, about movement, about hydration, but there isn't seen to be a viable alternative to either this suppression or temporary removal of endometriosis. And that's not fair. That really isn't fair, because I'm living proof that you can manage your endometriosis naturally, and you can go as deep as you want with managing your endo naturally. I've always said you can either have symptom management for endometriosis, so you can do things to naturally manage pain, you can do things to naturally manage bloating, all of the stuff, the fatigue, the energy levels, the hormonal imbalances, the emotional imbalances. You can do things to manage them when they flare. You can do things to prevent them flaring in the first place as well. And you can opt in, you can choose, you do have a choice in terms of how deep you go with that. But because we're not given all of this information when we are on that endometriosis pathway, it's very, very hard to then tell yourself that actually these are options, because your doctors aren't just aren't telling you about it. So that's kind of why it's so misunderstood. It's so misunderstood because historically it's just dismissed as women's health issues. It's just dismissed as a period, and so many times I've used that in my marketing so often. Endometriosis isn't just a bad period, because actually that's kind of the impression that people are given. But actually, like I say, if we start twisting that rhetoric, if we start talking about the immune impact, the inflammatory impact, the wider hormonal impact of endometriosis and vice versa, then it starts to reflect the complexity and the nuance of the actual condition that we have. I feel like I've been on a rant. That's not entirely where I meant this podcast to go. But anyway, so what it can actually feel like to live with endo is, again, it's personal to each and every woman. So some women have symptoms all the time. Some women have symptoms that flare up just at time of bleeding or ovulation. Some women have symptoms that they see no pattern in at all. You can have pelvic pain, you can have back pain, you can have hip pain, even knee pain. There's reasons why. I might do a separate podcast on that. Like I say, I need to write these separate podcast ideas down. You can have bladder, bowel issues. I've had some women who have had so much pain around their bladder that they've actually been sent for pelvic floor physio and been told they have pelvic floor dysfunction disorders, when actually, I suppose it might well result in that ultimately, but actually the root cause is their endometriosis. We can have painful sex, we can have incredibly debilitating fatigue, so low energy levels, but not just low energy levels emotionally, but physically, to the point where you can barely walk, you can't get upstairs. We can have infertility, although infertility is not as widespread as we think it is. If you believe Dr. Google, the impact of endometriosis on fertility isn't massive, but it can be a concern. And then the stuff that we don't talk about necessarily as well, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the depression, the low mood, the mood swings, all of the emotional stuff that comes with an endometriosis diagnosis as well. The invisible impact of that. I say invisible impact because, again, we don't really talk about it. And there's a reason why. I remember my sister, who had a diagnosis of endometriosis about a similar time as me, actually went to a conference put on, and this is, again, going back 20 plus years. She actually went to a conference put on by one of the leading endometriosis organisations. And their main sort of tagline was, women with endometriosis are missing X amount of days of work per year. And my sister actually stood up and said, hang on, we shouldn't be talking about this. This is kind of publicising the negative impact of endometriosis. We need to be finding cures. We need to be finding positive things. We don't need to just be dwelling in this kind of negativity around it. And she's so right. I mean, it is important that we recognise that that women do take time off because of their endometriosis, in the same way that they do because of their menopause, adenomyosis, fibroids, all the other women's health stuff. And the emphasis is not on the woman to change that. The emphasis is on the system. We need better working practices. We need flexible working. We need more understanding generally of periods in the workplace. And there's people like me out there doing training and awareness raising in workplaces. That is changing. But still, the rhetoric that isn't necessarily changing as much as it should be since those days is this invisible cost. So we still do think of endometriosis as a barrier to work. A lot of my clients consider leaving jobs because they can't talk about their endometriosis at work, because, again, it's so misunderstood. It can impact on relationships and social life, massively impact on your self-confidence, on your body confidence, on your self-esteem. And all of these are stuff we don't really talk about. And the reason I'm talking about it here in terms of what is endometriosis, just to hammer home, if you didn't need to know already, just to hammer home why it isn't just a bad period, why endometriosis is so much more of a complex condition than just a heavy period or just a bad period. No matter how you feel endometriosis, no matter how endometriosis manifests for you, that is absolutely your story. And again, I hear so many women, again, I think it was just yesterday somebody said to me, it might have been the day before, but last couple of days, somebody said to me, my symptoms aren't that bad. I know there's people who have it a lot worse out there. And again, that kind of minimalisation of our own symptoms, again, it isn't our fault. It's because of what we have to go through to get heard in the first place. So whatever your story is, no matter how you feel your symptoms are impacting or not impacting, please, please do not minimalize them. Please do not normalize them. You're not imagining your symptoms. You're not overplaying them. You might be downplaying them, but that's not your fault. That's because of what we have to go through, like I say, to get that diagnosis in the first place. But you're certainly not alone, because like I say, the vast majority, if not every single woman I have ever spoken to, I don't want to say that hand on heart because I can't genuinely remember, but I would say the vast majority of women I have spoken to over when did I open this clinic? 2008, so however, my maths isn't great, however many years that is, I would say the vast majority of the women I've spoken to with endo are self-critical of their own symptoms. They're dismissive and minimalising their own symptoms because that's what we're told. So you are not alone. And I'll say it again, it isn't your fault. So what is endometriosis then from an Eastern medicine point of view? So I've got to be careful because I could talk about this for hours. I've actually revamped my masterclass. So head over to my website and check out my revamped masterclass. It was supposed to be a 20-minute webinar on my 3-step process for managing endometriosis. It isn't. It's an hour. That's still a lot shorter than the 2 hours I used to do in lockdown when I first launched it. But it's still a lot longer. So I've got to be careful that this podcast doesn't run into the hours. But Eastern medicine gives us a bit more of an insight into endometriosis, and I won't go into it in full detail, but Eastern medicine, so when I'm talking about Eastern medicine, that's kind of the system of medicine that things like acupuncture, Reiki, there's so many, my mind's just gone completely blank, but that kind of system, reflexology, all of that kind of stuff, that's where all of these things come from, and they treat the symptoms, so they don't treat the label. So quite often people will contact me saying, I have adenomyosis, can you still help me? I don't have a diagnosis of endometriosis yet. None of that actually makes a difference. So if you come and see someone like me or a naturopath, easy for me to say, or anybody who's in the kind of the alternative, in inverted commas, medicine world, we don't necessarily, it sounds awful, we don't necessarily care whether you have an endometriosis diagnosis. We don't care if you don't have an endometriosis diagnosis. What we do is treat your symptoms. So it doesn't even matter if you have a misdiagnosis. So if you have a misdiagnosis of IBS, which is really common, if you have a misdiagnosis of polycystic ovaries, if you have a misdiagnosis of pelvic floor dysfunction, none of that actually matters, because what we actually do is sit down and talk about your actual symptoms. So we talk about what you're going through, what you're experiencing, and how we can alleviate that. So we look beyond the label. We look beyond that period, that gynecological, that endometriosis label. And Eastern medicine tells us that everything has a cause. So yeah, we don't know what the cause of endometriosis is, and it's potentially not as obvious as a broken bone. So if you're riding your bike and you fall off your bike and you land funnily on your shoulder and your shoulder pops out, there is this distinct cause there for your dislocated shoulder. Now, things like endometriosis and other chronic health conditions aren't that obvious. It won't necessarily be a one-off thing that's caused it, but we can trace back, we can identify causes at best. At worst, and it's not really at worst, it's still a good thing, but we can identify triggers. So do you know what your triggers for your endometriosis are? And I mean really know what your triggers for endometriosis are. And again, not to dismiss what people have gone through, but quite often someone will come to me and say, I know that, so this is a really common one, I know that if I eat pizza, I'm including that because that used to be me. I know that if I used to say that, pizza is a trigger, so it must be the bread. So if I go gluten-free, that should help. And then I get really confused because it doesn't help. I might have identified one trigger, but there may well be a few, and it might not be the gluten that's the issue. It could be the tomato base, it could be the cheese, whatever. So one of the things that I say what you can do, one of the first steps, and I talk about this in the webinar, one of the first steps that I would urge you to do if you are contemplating this natural endometriosis management is to track everything. There are apps out there. I haven't found an app, so I have a spreadsheet. I have a Google spreadsheet because I am a bit of a geek that tracks everything that I feel that we should be tracking in order to see patterns emerging. I haven't found an app that is quite as comprehensive, but on the flip side, I also think that the apps are a lot easier to use. So I would recommend either my spreadsheet, which is free, but very, very cumbersome. Or if you're already using an app that you think is really user-friendly and really easy to use, then stick to that. But add in fields. So add in, even if it's just notes, add in different things. So track, as a basic level, track the symptoms that you're experiencing. So track your pain, record everything out of 10 as well, because then you can start to see subtle differences. We can start to really hone into the type of pain you're feeling, the places that you're feeling your pain. And if you score it out of 10, you can start to see trends, you can start to see shifts, you can start to see what actually works, what actually makes you feel better, and what's actually making you feel worse. So track all of your physical and your emotional symptoms, and then also track what you're doing. So track your activity so you can start to see patterns. So things like activity, how much movement did you have today? What did you eat? How much water did you drink? Did you take any supplements? Did you take any medication? Track everything. Self-awareness and self-connection is the power that you need, and quite often that power is taken away from us in the Western medicine pathway, because we are constantly, like I said, I don't know how long this podcast has been going on, but like I said about 2 hours ago, we are dismissed and gaslit pretty much at every stage, especially in the early stages of the diagnosis pathway. So reclaiming that power and getting some self-awareness and self-knowledge of what your endometriosis actually looks like can actually be empowering. Well, it is empowering, but it can actually be medication with a small m in its own right. I've said so many times, quite often people will book a call with me, and quite often I don't have much availability in the immediate future. So sometimes people are waiting a few weeks to see me, especially well online appointments, especially. But so quite often somebody will book in, and their session will be in, say, 6 weeks' time. And then when it actually comes to the session, they'll start the call by saying, "Do you know what? I actually feel a lot better. I felt a lot better this last cycle since I booked the call." Part of the problem with that is as well, and this is something that I haven't actually made a note of, but quite often as well, when we are in this cycle, if you will, of symptoms flaring and then reducing, then flaring and reducing, it's very, very easy to sit when our symptoms are naturally reduced, when our symptoms aren't flaring, to think, "Oh, do you know what, this is actually quite manageable." And then it'll flare up again and we'll think, "Oh no, it isn't really manageable." And then we get caught in this cycle. And this is kind of the same when people book the call. They're kind of thinking, "Do you know what, actually things are feeling a lot better." There is part of that's the natural cycle anyway, of the flare, not flare, flare, not flare. But feeling like you're regaining control, feeling like you're actually doing something to reduce the overwhelm and the stress, can actually have a positive impact on your symptoms as well. So start tracking everything. Start tracking everything you're doing, everything you're feeling. Start to see patterns. And I make a big thing about doing it every day. My symptom tracker is day by day by day. Consistency clearly is key. The same with everything. The more data you have, the easier it is to see patterns. But our health isn't that. Again, it's quite nuanced. So there might be days where you're just not feeling it. Consistency in this event, in this scenario, is being consistently inconsistent, if you like. It's about being gentle with yourself. So it's about saying, "Do you know what, I haven't tracked for 2 weeks, but that's okay, I'm just going to start again." Or, "Do you know what, I'm really not feeling it today, I'm going to maybe track what I can. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes and I'm just going to do 10 minutes of connecting to my body and just noting what I feel." Or I'm just going to go in, I'm going to completely disregard the fact I can't be bothered. I'm going to sit and set a timer for half an hour and I'm going to go in deep. No matter how you feel, no matter what you do, it's about being gentle with yourself and just being mindful of the fact that the more data you have, the more patterns you can see. But it doesn't matter if that takes you a few months. It doesn't matter if it takes you a year or two. It's your journey. So what you can also do, again, there is no real kind of catch-all advice for endometriosis in terms of feeling better other than these things I'm going to say. These will have gentle impacts. They will start to help. And once you get the patterns from that first step, you'll be able to see exactly what you can do more. But things like balancing blood sugar, so having slow release carbohydrates. I work with a lot of women, and I have worked with a lot of women in the past, who see food as, or who have a slightly unhealthy relationship with food, because we are told one of the big boom industries from about about maybe 5-7 years ago was endometriosis diets, anti-inflammatory diets, and they can help. But because inflammation is only one part of endometriosis, it's exactly the same as saying it's a gynecological issue, it's a hormone issue. It isn't always, and probably isn't, just an inflammatory issue. So an inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory diet might well help, but again, you're not going to see that root cause, that root trigger, suppression, I nearly said, tackling the root cause or the root trigger. But we're kind of told that diet will help. So we're kind of told that, or we're kind of, that leads to these beliefs that food can act as medicine. And food absolutely can act as medicine. But the best way to approach food is not to restrict your diet. It's not to restrict what you're eating, and it's certainly not to restrict your calories. So when you're restricting calories, what you're actually doing is restricting your body's ability to take, or your body's fuel, essentially. So if you think about food as fuel, exactly the same as your car. If you're running your car on empty, your car's not going to run to its optimum capacity. Your body's exactly the same. So slow release carbohydrates, eat as seasonally as possible. So tune into the seasons of your cycle as well as the actual season outside. Tune into what your body needs. Eat as wholesome as you can, so eat as natural as you can, eat the colours of the rainbow, eat things that are going to serve you. Use food as fuel. Don't use food as punishment. Try not to use food as reward either. Really, really look at your relationship with food and balance your diet, balance your natural intake. And that's not to say that you can't eat chocolate. I'm a chocoholic. I have always been a chocoholic. I have not given up I didn't drink a lot for a long time. It wasn't necessarily to do with my endometriosis. I don't know if it helped or not, to be honest, but I don't advocate restrictive diets at all. Anything you need to know about how your diet impacts your endometriosis, you will be able to see from your tracker. So I wouldn't advocate a restricted diet necessarily at all. Again, if you've got that advice from your doctor, I don't want to completely give you completely conflicting advice to your doctors. If you have been given advice for a restrictive diet, then absolutely follow that advice to a T. I'm just talking generalized terms. So reduce inflammation. So do take things like hot baths. Do things like castor oil packs, turmeric, that kind of thing. Again, track it, because just because it's recognised as having anti-inflammatory properties, it might not mean that it helps you. So it's always good to know whether it even has an adverse effect as well. So if you're doing things like I've just suggested, like turmeric, hot baths, castor oil packs, make sure that you track the impact of them. Now, it might just be that it's an emotional impact, that it relaxes you, that it makes you feel better emotionally. That's absolutely fine. Don't detract from that. But also track the impact it has on your physical symptoms as well. And start to limit your, how to say this nicely, start to limit your access to people who bring you down. So track your, sounds awful, but be very mindful of the social media content that you're exposing yourself to. Be very aware of the company you're keeping. Be very aware of the rhetoric that you're subjecting yourself to, and that includes the stories that you're telling yourself, the beliefs that you're fueling. Try and shift any negative mindsets. Try and start believing that you can manage your endometriosis, because even that belief, like I said before, it's empowering, and it can actually see a reduction in your symptoms just by that mindset shift. And I know that sounds bizarre, and that isn't to say that endometriosis is in our minds, because it absolutely isn't. It is completely real. The flip side of that is that the positive mindset, that belief, pure belief that you can start to control your endometriosis, can just make you feel that little bit better. So I hope this podcast has been useful to you. Like I say, we launched I didn't actually launch the workbook. The workbook's been around for a while, but from last week, you fabulous endometriosis podcast listeners can get a free endometriosis empowerment workbook. So there will be a link in the show notes. If there isn't, then you can still head over to the website, click on the Endometriosis Empowerment Workbook, and if you use the discount code ENDOPODCAST, that will give you the full £15 off the workbook. And if you do want to start looking at a natural way of managing your endometriosis, this is a really lovely first step. It's also the basis for everything else that I do. So it's kind of the stuff that I interweave throughout my programs. It's the stuff that I kind of assess when I have a discovery call with people. So it's a really nice, gentle step to get you into that place where you can really start to believe that you can manage your endometriosis. So I hope, like I say, that this has helped. If there's one thing I want you to know after this podcast, your body is not broken. You are doing the absolute best you can with what is an incredibly difficult condition. It's a complex condition. It isn't just a bad period. You are experiencing, at least, like I say, one of those three things, probably, if not all three, definitely two of them. And you're doing incredibly well, no matter where you are in your journey. The very fact that you're managing, however managing looks like for you, you're doing fabulously. Be very, very gentle with yourself. We're going to delve a little bit more into these over the coming weeks, over some of the issues that I've raised. But if you do have a topic that you'd like to see me cover in this podcast, then feel free to email me. Similarly, I do endometriosis clinics as well, or women's health clinics, because it's not just about endometriosis, because there's so many overlapping themes, but they are on the first Tuesday of every week. You're more than welcome to attend them as well. You can find them on my website. If you can't, just drop me a message. And like I say, please do take the opportunity of getting that free endometriosis empowerment workbook as well. Until next time, I wish you every happiness, every success on whatever steps you take to manage your endo. And if you need any help, you know exactly where I am. Take care.